Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Academy Insider Podcast. In today's episode, I'm joined by Andrea Howard, who's a dear friend of mine, a member of the Academy Insider Advisory Board, and just a genuine, incredible human being. She service-selected submarines. She's been a submarine junior officer on the USS OHIO, which is a SSGN submarine. And if you're interested in what that term means, listen to the episode and we'll do a full breakdown of some of the submarine terminology that you may hear. And then is now currently a department head on a fast attack submarine out on the East Coast. And so this episode really is going to be a high-level overview of submarines. If you're interested in learning about the different types of submarines and what they do, some of the pros and cons of the lifestyle versus the mission, and then get a good understanding of what makes being a submariner incredible. What are some of the amazing things and why people should consider it? But also with radical transparency, some of the difficulties of the life as a submarine officer. And so if you're interested in hearing all of these different things as you're trying to learn about what your son or daughter may be doing, or if you're a prospective student about what you want to do in the future, then check this out. I think this episode's also great for midshipmen, specifically about the lifestyle and what things are important and what things are difficult and great about being a submarine junior officer. So if you know someone who may benefit from this information or think could, really appreciate this discussion, make sure to send it to them. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the episode. The Academy Insider Podcast is sponsored by the Vermeer Group, a residential real estate company that serves the United States Naval Academy community and other select clientele in both California and Texas. If I can ever answer a real estate related question for you or connect you with a trusted Academy affiliated agent in the market which you're in, please reach out to me directly at grant@thevermeergroup.com. You can also reach out to me on my LinkedIn page, Grant Vermeer, and I'd be happy to respond to you there. Thank you so much. And now let's get back to the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Academy Insider Podcast. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us again. For anyone who's not familiar, again, Andrea is a part of the advisory board on Academy Insider, one of my extremely close personal friends, and just an absolute incredible human being, an incredible submarine officer. So if anyone is not familiar with you or hasn't heard you on the Academy Insider Podcast or seen you kind of separate from this as well, do you mind just giving a quick background and introduction about where you're from, how you ended up at the Naval Academy, and now currently what you're doing in your life in the fleet?
Absolutely. Well, chief among the titles that I hold is number one, Grant Vermeer, an Academy Insider fan. So it is such a treat to get to be back on the show with you and to elevate this platform that you created many years ago and continues to thrive. But I am a proud Atlantan, and I've found that coming from the super diverse background that was presented to me in Atlanta has been one of the greatest assets in my naval career. Mm-hmm. From Atlanta, I went directly to the Naval Academy from high school. I was a political science and Arabic double major. And since then, I've had the opportunity to really travel the world, both above the sea and underneath it. From the above the sea perspective, I had the opportunity to study for 2 years for graduate school in the United Kingdom, first at King's College London, and then at the University of Oxford. I came back to the United States, did about 1.5 years of the nuclear training pipeline, and went on to my first submarine, the USS OHIO, SSGN 726, the oldest operating submarine in the fleet. You and I, Grant, had a little bit of time under the sea together for that boat for deployment certifications. I then took the opportunity to do a direct to department head option, so I forewent my shore duty for a number of reasons, partly because some may say I'm a little bit crazy and submarine gung-ho. But with that opportunity, I was able to then go to the department head school in Groton, Connecticut for 6 months and reported to my first department head submarine tour on the PCU New Jersey, soon to be USS New Jersey. And I just split toured up to Groton, Connecticut, and I'm now the navigator and operations officer on South Dakota, SSN 790.
I love it. And just quick admin question for people who may be listening. PCU, this term you use, PCU. Can you break it out for them?
Yes, that is a pre-commissioning unit. So a naval vessel that has not yet been commissioned. Spoken alternatively, it has not been certified by the powers that be, the Secretary of the Navy, to serve in the fleet in a more permanent fashion. So it is not the first time that the New Jersey SSN 796 will be out and about on the water and under the sea. We actually completed sea trials. It's first underway back in the March timeframe. But since then, with a number of follow-on certifications under its belt, New Jersey is now ready to permanently join the fleet.
I love it. And again, if you're listening to Andrea and you're like, holy smokes, that's an incredible resume, which it is, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to episode 14 of the Academy Insider podcast, where we do a deep dive into Andrea's experience again in graduate school, actually service selecting submarines and going through the nuke interview, talking to admirals, going to the nuclear power school pipeline, living in Charleston, and then going out to her boat from there. So if you're interested in some of the more minutia of the submarine selection process and making your way to the fleet, again, I highly encourage you to check out episode 14. But today is going to be all about kind of just this submarine fleet. I really want this episode to be an opportunity for prospective high school students who may be considering the Naval Academy or, again, an ROTC or even enlisting to learn a little bit about the fleet, and then just have a little bit of perspective of not only being a submarine junior officer, but now time as a department head, which is a distinction, especially in the fleet when it comes to roles and responsibilities. And so this episode is going to be a breakdown of that. And we're going to start with a conversation because you use multiple terms. If someone has no idea about submarines, they probably have no idea what it means when you say SSGN versus an SSN and the numbers associated with it. And so I do want to just kind of talk about the three different types of submarines that we have currently in the fleet between an SSGN, an SSN, and an SSBN. And I just want to turn it to you of like, what's the difference? What are their different missions? What can it mean? And then specifically for the life of an individual, the life of a junior officer, how does lifestyle change between these three platforms?
The lifestyle ultimately is about having fun while doing cool things. So I'll throw that out there to begin with. That's why we were able to get, U Grant Vermeer underway on the submarines.
True.
In a supporting fashion from the intelligence and signals collection side. But I'll break it down into our three groups here. So we'll start with the oldest, in the fleet, which is the SSGNs, the guided missile submarines. And it gets a little bit confusing. The G, again, standing for guided missile, because they're a conversion from the SSBNs, the ballistic missile submarines. So G for guided, B for ballistic. But the four SSGNs, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, and Georgia, originally, like I said, started as ballistic missile submarines. But around the early 2010s, they were converted into platforms that carried the most cruise missiles of any naval platform that's in existence in the fleet. So their primary missions now are strike, and then they also have an ability to field 2 dry deck shelters to carry special warfare personnel and Navy divers to covertly deploy those forces onto places and, on the sea, under the sea, where they support national security missions. Mm-hmm. So again, strike and naval special warfare. People will describe SSGNs as the best of both worlds, and I'll dig into that a little bit, but they do sort of a combination based on the size of the conventional ballistic missile platform, or what historically, with these massive 560-foot submarines, they combine that size with some of the stealth and forward-leaning presence of the SSNs, the fast boats. So SSGNs, think hybrid, older submarines. We don't know exactly what their future looks like. They keep getting extended from a whole life perspective. But that's where I started my submarine tour. You'll hear about the fast attack life with those SSNs, but I like to think of SSGNs as slow attack tough. So, a little bit of a mix of the Ohio size with the SSN stealth. So then we'll go over to the SSBNs. There are 14 SSBNs in the fleet. The breakdown at the moment is 6 on the East Coast in Kings Bay, Georgia, and 8 on the West Coast out of Bangor, Washington. They are the number one DoD priority. And that's just not my opinion. That is the actual reflection of the role that they play within the Navy. SSBNs carry 24 Trident D5 missiles, which are equipped with nuclear warheads. And they are the most survivable leg of the nuclear triad. Our Air Force brethren have the 2 other legs in the form of silos and bombers. But when it comes to having a covert location for nuclear-equipped missiles, your SSBNs are the meat and potatoes of strategic deterrence. And so you'll hear the phrase in popular culture, "Okay, boomer." We've kind of co-opted that and applied that to the SSBN life. So, SSBNs, if they complain about schedules and things, they're 2 crew submarines with pretty consistent schedules. So if you ever hear an SSBN sailor complain about their ship schedule and their quality of life, I think an appropriate response is, "Okay, boomer." Exactly. And then lastly, we have SSNs, which comprise the majority of the roughly 70 boat fleet that we have. So if you can do public math, you're talking about in the realm of about 50 of those submarines. There are different variants of them. We don't have to go into that. I think if you're interested in submarines, you can do a little bit of Googling. And we actually talked about that in episode 14 as well.
Mm-hmm.
But SSNs are one crew submarines. So again, whereas SSGNs and SSBNs have two crews that rotate in a semi-consistent fashion, SSNs, it's one crew, one hull, and you are in and out all the time. However, given the size and the speed of these assets, you're able to go places more quickly and maybe get a little bit closer to some of these locations that the Ohio class submarines, be it SSGNs or SSBNs, might not be able to reach.
Absolutely. And when you mention these two crews, when one crew is actually out on the submarine conducting the mission, what's the second crew doing at home? Are they just hanging out, or what? Again, when we talk about the two crew cycle, what do you do when you're at home?
You are not just hanging out. So there are trainers ashore, whether you are a one crew submarine or two crew submarine, that allow you to hone different submarine warfare domains.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have attack centers, we call them, that simulate what a control room is like in a submarine, wherein you would be driving, ingesting inputs into sonar, which is kind of our eyes and ears to operate submerged. You still have your fire control technicians who are analyzing that sonar data and making solutions, as we call them, so that we are able to have a three-dimensional picture, XYZ axis of anything that's in the water column. And you have your navigation electronics technicians, who I am particularly fond of as the navigator on board, who make sure that we can drive, again, not just in 2 dimensions, but 3-dimensionally, with a safe buffer to the bottom and anything laterally that could compromise the safety of the submarine. So we're able to exercise the attack centers. If you're an SSBN, that ballistic missile sailor, there are ways that you can practice, break in the nuclear codes. I've never done that personally, but it's a pretty intense exercise that has a lot of rigidity to the command and control. And there are also trainers where we can practice driving on the surface. So you might think, I'm a submariner, I can just submerge by the pier, where usually the water depth doesn't support that. Best place to pilot out of historically is Guam, because you drive out of the harbor and then you're right off the continental shelf and going down to the Marianas Trench. But for other locations, we really do actually spend quite a bit of time driving on the surface. Mm-hmm. So if you're a junior officer who's on board, you'll have plenty of time to hone those skills, whether it's driving on the surface, driving submerged. We have trainers that simulate radio communications or the electronic warfare spectrum. There are plenty of opportunities for you to kind of get your feet wet in an environment where the hull of the submarine can't be endangered. Sure. And make some mistakes and get better because of it.
Absolutely. And kind of the thing that I want to talk about as someone who's not a submariner, but has spent a lot of time on submarines, kind of the biggest differential from an outside perspective of what we're talking about between these different platforms is exactly kind of what you mentioned earlier, is quite literally the size of the platform. And so it can make a really interesting perspective, because these SSBNs and the SSGNs are massive, whereas the SS, the fast attack submarines, are really tight and really crammed quarters. And it was really interesting because, again, when I showed up on Ohio with Andrew on board, I literally walked down that hatch and I was like, what have I been missing?
So much room for activities.
So much room for activities. I was like, this is crazy. This is like, I'm on a cruise ship here. Like, this is crazy, because I spent all my time deploying on fast attacks. And so to kind of switch over to that, there's a ton more space, right? There's a ton more space, which, again, from a perspective of just the quality of life, or just, again, being on board a submarine, on the SSGN, there was quite literally a Smith machine. Like, you could do bench press, you can squat, you can lift weights. And again, whereas on the SSN, I was lucky if I was doing pull-ups between the ladder wells, right? And maybe some dumbbells and a bike, and hopefully the treadmill works, but it's possible that it doesn't, right? And so it's quite a distinction, but at the same time, like you're saying, that SSN life, the mission set associated with it is really cool, and it's really high speed, and like it really gives you that sense of adventure, excitement, mission, and purpose in the day-to-day life. And again, on the SSBN side, you definitely have that mission and purpose, right? Like you're saying, it's quite literally the most important factor towards our
Hmm.
national security posture. But your day-to-day life can probably get a little boring, right? Sometimes you're just kind of driving circles, right? You're driving circles in the ocean and just,
Correct.
stand by to stand by. And so what I do want to talk a little bit about, again, with these sizes, there were multiple crews when I was going on the fast boats that were all men. In
Hmm.
my last deployment, I deployed on the John Warner, and we had 3 women on board. Was a woman and then 2 other female officers. And so with that is that the same? Again, for me, we're approaching 4 or 5 years ago. So what is the opportunity that exists for women in the submarine fleet in terms of like actually being assigned to a submarine? And does it differ between the enlisted side and the officer side? And what's kind of the current layout?
Yeah, it definitely is different on the officer and enlisted side, but I'm happy to report that great progress is being made and in an accelerated fashion. So to peek behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz, or at least the wizard of what is the Women in Submarines plan. That is a real plan. There's a Women in Submarines plan with an assigned junior officer who is the Women in Submarines coordinator, and with the turnover that they just recently underwent and really the inertia of women's success on board these platforms, we're seeing the opportunities for women open up in an accelerated fashion. So,
Mhm.
where are we at right now? The rough numbers, I usually have these in front of me, but there are, of the 70 boats, over 20 now that are open to officers for opportunities to go underway. So if you're looking at crews, it's really more in the 30s because of those 2 crew submarines.
Mhm.
So all of the SSGNs are integrated for officers. There's a handful of SSBNs. I know that one of my good buddies just became the eng on another SSBN out on the West Coast, the Pennsylvania. And so, again, there are, as we're speaking, and over this next year, I anticipate probably three or four more of those SSBNs will get integrated with officers.
Mhm.
And then from the fast attack side, this past year, the 688 class, so an additional class of the fast attacks, just became open. So we're at a point where all 3 of the Seawolves, another class in the SSNs, are fully integrated to include the Jimmy Carter, which is pretty notorious for doing a special mission set. A handful now of the 688s, and the Virginias, all of the newer boats, will all future Virginias will be built to include officers and actually enlisted women.
Hmm.
But so you'll get to a point here where probably by 2035, at least half, if not more, of the submarines will be integrated with officers, with increased opportunities for at least rides for the enlisted women.
Sure.
The enlisted women integration began in earnest. I think the announcement came in 2015 or 16, and then there's always about a 2-year follow on to get those first sailors to the boat. So when Michigan became the first boat, I believe it was in 2016 or 17. It's been a little bit of a slower roll, but now again starting to accelerate for the enlisted gals. So all 4 of the SSGNs are integrated. I believe there are 3 SSBN crews that are integrated, and then every fast attack that is now built will include those enlisted women. So New Jersey, the PCU that's about to commission that I
Mhm.
was on, was the first fully integrated Virginia class fast attack submarine, which was a really exciting milestone then to do sea trials with the first integrated fast attack crew from the most junior ranks up to myself, the female senior leader who was on board.
Mhm.
So we're making strides, but if I kind of holistically capture in numbers, about 20 boats, 30 crews for the officers, and then on the enlisted side, you're probably in the ballpark now of about 15 crews or so that are fully integrated. Given that the majority of the enlisted sailors for now are on those SSBNs and GNs, with increased opportunities in the future for them to be on the fast attacks.
No, I love it. I think that's a really cool, again, transition. It was really it was awesome, right? Again, all I talk about is from my personal anecdote and experience because again, I deployed on like you're saying I was a 688 guy for a long time. I deployed
Yeah,
on a lot of the old boats, right? I
the
was
old tough.
Providence, Newport News, Albany,
Mhm.
which is an I boat, but still. And then I finally got to go on John Warner, right? And to have that was again, it was an incredible,
Yeah.
incredible experience, right? And I mean, for anyone who's not aware, during that time, they had literally dubbed, it was the funniest because Will Wiley is like, he's an incredible guy and super humble, but like the submarine force loved him too.
Yeah.
And so they were,
He was the captain of John Warner, just to
oh yeah,
throw that out. Didn't mention
yeah,
that.
Will
Captain of
Wiley,
John.
thank you. He was the CEO of John Warner. And like literally there were people calling him Submarine Jesus. That man could do no wrong. And it was just like, it was a really cool experience because we'll kind of talk about, I think, a little bit more in this and some of the experiences of actually being on a submarine and doing the work is that you're going to have different experiences on different boats. It's very
Yeah.
similar to what we talk about on Academy Insider a lot about the company that you're in can completely change the experience you have. And there's a lot of input and culture that's associated with it. And that's the same thing when you hit the fleet, right? Different submarines will perform at different levels. Different submarines will have different cultures. And so to kind of get on that platform at the end where the USS John Warner was just like, it was unbelievable. They were an extremely high performing submarine. And like
Yeah.
that stuff is really cool. And so I do want to just tailor and shift the discussion a tiny bit here to the experience of being on a submarine and now having your JO tour complete, a lot of time in on your department head tour, and time on now Fast Attack, the SSN, and time on an SSGN, and seeing kind of two similar but different mission sets. What are some of the amazing things about being a submarine officer? Like what to you has been like so incredible and really cool and keeps you going and led you to make the decision to stay in, right? And like short,
Mhm.
or not even stay in, but like get rid of your short tour and fast tour to be a department head and stay out to sea and stay conducting the mission. Like what in your opinion are some of the incredible aspects of being a submarine officer?
Yeah, it is a highly technical enterprise where you have to take monthly exams on nuclear propulsion. You have to take consistent, qualification tests and continuous improvement metrics to validate that you are safe to operate not only a reactor plant and steam systems back aft to turn the screw and keep the ship going, but to also validate on what, in my opinion, is the more fun side. Again, I'm a navigator, driving this vessel while doing these missions that are vital to national security. But in that paradigm where you're like, it's got to be so technical and there's so much engineering focus and tactical studying, it really is just a people business. I say it's kind of ironic that I think you lock 130 plus souls underneath the sea in a tin can, and while it seems super inhumane and in fact like a really tough environment where the ocean, we always kind of say, is trying to get you, is trying to best you and your crew, you put people in this really unnatural set of conditions and you end up finding the best parts of humanity. You, in fact, learn what makes you human, what makes you joyous, what makes you tick, what irritates you. And you find out the same about 130 different people on board. And it gets to the point where you can hear people moving down the passageway or just hear their voice. And not only do you recognize who it is by their voice and their movements, but you can tell their mood. You get to know these people so intimately because you're in this almost like NASA-esque experience where you're living like folks going to populate Mars together, right? So, I mean, that really is the most fascinating part of the job and the thing that is consistent across the crews. One thing I want to highlight for any of the gals who may be listening who are intrigued in joining is that you might be like, oh my goodness, you're gonna like lock me under the sea with all these guys. How many women are there per boat? We talked about kind of the overarching scheme.
Mm-hmm.
We're at a point now where we're on the officer side. So anybody who'd be going through the Naval Academy, by the time that they get to a wardroom, unless they are one of the first folks to integrate a boat, wherein they usually send a department head and 2 junior officers. So there'd be a set of 3 women. And it's not because 3 is a lucky number. That's typically the size of a stateroom. So the 3 of you can live together very easily when you're doing that initial transition. But outside of the context of being an integrator of a boat, if you're on one of these boats that's had women for probably 2 or 3 years, you'll find that at least half of your wardroom, so 7 to 8, personnel out of 15 are probably going to be women. And then on the enlisted side, there's less crews, but still a high number of women. So what it breaks down to is that you typically have about 20 to 30 women on each of these crews on the enlisted side to give you a total population breakdown of probably like 25% of the crew is women between the officers and the enlisted. So it's not like you're totally alone. What makes being a submariner the essence of submarining, I guess, is like I said, it really is a people business. And so, folks will always, allude to the great missions that were done in places that can't be spoken of. But what really is very special is that, I've gone to weddings, I've met the kids, I've gotten the opportunity to re-enlist people from all different creeds, the best of the patchwork quilt that is our nation. And to have the opportunity to work with them is really special. I'm kind of droning on because it's hard to capture the essence of what makes this community so great. But I will say this. My mom was a high school public educator, and I saw the way that she so directly impacted the lives of, the diaspora of folks from Atlanta who passed through her classroom doors. And that's the thing that kept me as a department head moving on from a junior officer level from that first tour to want to commit to a second tour. There is truly nothing greater as an officer in the United States Navy than getting to work with a demographic of like 18 to 24-year-olds who come from all parts of the country, of all different backgrounds, and to get to make the decision based on your attitude, your level of direct mentorship, and ultimately you make a change in their lives, whether they stay in the Navy or beyond. And I think that comes to bear very clearly in the submarine force by some of these other communities where you might not be directing leading sailors if you're an aviator or naval flight officer until well within the 9 or 10 year mark of your career.
Yep.
Your attitude like directly makes the days and therefore makes the whole experience of submarining for your sailors either superlatively positive or something that they want to leave.
Sure. I think that's a really interesting point. And in the proximity, quite literally the physical space, I think does contribute to that, right? I think it's really interesting because, again, as a midshipman, for what it's worth, like going on summer cruise on an LSD, there was plenty of times where you can get away and just be by yourself, right? You sit out on the deck, whatever, like you can just like stare out into the vast ocean and hang out. You can find space to be private and by yourself. On a submarine, it's just not the case. Especially a fast attack, right? Like you are with those people 24/7, right? And so I joke, it's almost similar as a TV buff and fan that I am. It's almost similar to the Big Brother house. Like you really get to know someone really fast because you have no other option but to communicate with them, to be a part of their life, and to impact them just by your attitude, just by your demeanor, the way that you're interacting with them. It's going to be day in and day out for an extended period of time. And the beauty of that is you can build some really incredible relationships in what others may consider a short amount of time. But again, if you're stuck on a submarine together for 90 days straight under the ocean, no popping up and breathing fresh air, right? Like you're going to build a really special relationship with those people. And I think that's a really cool aspect. And it was something that I really enjoyed in taking my detachment of sailors onto the different submarines. Is like I knew I was going to have a 45 to like 80 day period where I could invest in sailors' lives, right? And help them achieve what they wanted to achieve. Whether that was in the Navy, like help them get their fish, help them qualify IW, qualify their senior watch positions as a part of our elements. Or if it was, hey, I know, like, sir, I joined the Navy because I wanted to get free college, right? And so it's like, all right, well, let's take care of our job. We're going to work with Chief. We're going to get you qualified. But in your downtime, let's sit down and talk about college. Let's work on SAT problems. Let's do these things. And again, you don't have another option, right? Like you don't get to run away from the leadership on submarines. It's going to approach you and hit you every single day in the face, right? And I think that's a really cool, interesting, and unique aspect of the submarine force. And the proximity quite literally makes a serious impact in that, right? And so I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I have a hot take because I know where this conversation is going, which is going to be, in the realm of how you can succeed as a junior officer in the submarine community. If you're a student who's looking to join the Navy and you're like, dang, I really love Top Gun. I want to be an aviator. Like, I've seen Battleship and I want to be like Rihanna and go drive on a destroyer, whatever, surface platform it is. I think that it makes sense that a lot of the folks who are now of the age where they'd be applying for the academy might not find submarines appealing. You can't be making TikToks and posting them real time when you're on your submarine, or trying to push out content on Instagram to garner all the followers. And so I could see how folks might be daunted by the prospect of living months under the sea and really an alternate reality while the world moves on. But my hot take is this: like, there is no better way to spend your young adulthood than in the leadership laboratory that is the environment we have described. Mm-hmm. You go to the academy because it is a hard thing to do, but it is a place where you develop yourself under pressure to become a better version of yourself. Diamonds take pressure to form, and the same thing can be said of midshipmen who become officers, and then officers who become submarine warfare qualified. Yeah. It is not a relaxing environment, but if you're that type of person where you run towards the hardest things because it will make you better, that's what submarining is all about. So in terms of then how you thrive once you make that commitment to be a junior officer in that environment, all I can say is this: folks are going to tell you within the submarine community that it's about qualifying rapidly, that it's about standing watch, it's about becoming a technical expert, knowing your references, and all those things are true, but I like to phrase it in a little bit of a different fashion, which is that your job is to lead teams. And there is no more effective weapon at leading teams than an awesome junior officer aboard a submarine. Yes, we want you to be as much of a technical expert as you can. Yes, we want you to learn from your chief and work with your sailors to get to a point that you know the books and know how to operate the most complex machines in the world. You know how to operate that submarine safely. But what I really need you to do is, while you're going through qualifications, is to take the extra 2 minutes to ask the sailor who's giving you a checkout. We do a lot of oral interviews. Give the sailor who's asking you to check out the opportunity to tell you about what makes them tick, where they're from, what their goals are. Because then when you're standing watch together in 8-hour cycles back in the engine room, for you to understand that person's family, and when they come in and they give you a technical brief and you're about to exercise maintenance or whatever the case may be, if you can have that touch point with them, hey, how's your wife? How's your kids? How's your husband? How's your niece who you always love to talk about? Mm-hmm. That is the thing that will make them realize that you care. It'll make their heart sing personally and professionally. And I guarantee you that when they go to do that evolution out in the space, they're going to do it right and have the integrity to do it correctly and want to do the best job possible, because they don't want to let you down, because they know that you have their back and they're going to have your back. So that's really, like I said, my little hot take is that, I love that. Your job as a JO is to get to know those sailors and to get to know what it's going to take to make them the best versions of themselves, both professionally and personally, because they're going to put out so much harder for you and the team. The mission's just going to come naturally. I think there's a lot of emphasis right now in the Navy on mission first, mission completeness. That'll follow. We take care of our people first, and then you'll be hard pressed to find a team that fails where the people feel cared for and want to care for their leaders.
Darn straight. I think we see that a lot in some of the voices that are coming out, like a Captain Hill, right? Chowda, the CEO of the Ike, right, has been really big about that, about taking care and loving his people radically, right?
For
like
sure.
The mission will have you do that. You have Captain Jervy Alota, right? Like he's very big on that as well. It's led to a lot of success, and it's really cool to see that. And again, like you mentioned, being a submarine JO, and for me being a cryptologic officer, right? Like it's all about leading teams. The more junior you are, the smaller your team's going to be, right? But as you get higher up, you start leading teams of teams, right? And I think that's a really interesting perspective, because again, when you show up, like you're saying, whether you're the engineering officer of the watch, whether you're the contact manager, whether you're standing a watch, whether you're the officer of the deck, all you are doing, quite literally, is leading your team, right? And you're going to have sailors that are going to be doing technical, tactical jobs. You're going to be using those data points to make recommendations to the officer of the deck. And as the officer of the deck, you have to make sure that all of your individual watch sections that are keeping the ship safe, from sonar to fire control to radio and ESM to everyone back aft, right? Like you are just leading those teams of teams, and everything just comes down to exactly that, to people, right? And again, the or like the not fun part of the job is at some point you are going to have to correct people, you are going to have to hold people accountable. But if it's been made very clear that like you genuinely care about them, you're invested in their life, doing that becomes a lot simpler, right? It becomes a lot simpler because they don't feel like you're holding a grudge out for them, right? They're not coming, like you're not trying to get after them. It's just, again, it comes down to, we're an elite team trying to do a good job. And if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, then like we need to adjust that. And it's never personal, right? The only personal between us is a care for your life and what you got going on. Right. And so
Absolutely. I'll tell a story that is new from this last underway that I just had that I think again underscores why submarines are so special.
Yep.
And people who might be, privy to this conversation between us are like, well, these folks are like skilled leaders. They've learned a bunch and they make no mistakes. Submarining is a community where backup is very much so desired and required.
Mm-hmm.
So I was off to the deck. You mentioned this term. So I am physically given the orders that allow us to drive the boat and give permission items for any evolution that's going on board. And we were transitioning from a submerged posture to being surfaced, so surfacing the ship. And I have very exacting standards for surfacing the ship because it's an evolution where, you are opening up what we call the people space in the submarine to the atmosphere, to the potentially water if done incorrectly. But, we have a very rigorous program by which we certify the team in order to validate that when we open the hatch that we are on the surface, staying on the surface, and are only bringing in air and not water. We did this brief, and I was with a new team on this new crew, to me at least, on South Dakota. And my oncoming lookout, so a guy who stands watch up on the surface in the bridge and is the 360-degree cognizance, he was stumbling over briefing his part. And it's the most important transition in my mind because you're physically sending people up to the surface for the first time. And we need to validate the conditions are correct and that he knows the actions both from a contact management perspective, so make sure we're not getting hit by somebody we didn't see on our sensors as we were coming up. And then furthermore, just to validate, like as the pressures from the ship to atmosphere is equalizing, that he's going to be safe. And it was the last of a series of frustrations that I had during that brief for this lookout to not be 100% accurate on his part, when I also had officers, junior officers, who had shown up a little bit late or not prepared for their parts of the evolution as well. Mm-hmm. So I kind of go on this spiel with a little bit of heightened sauce, we'll say, behind my voice. And I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky person when it as it goes on the boat, because I think it's important to be that for your people when appropriate. But I put a little bit of sauce behind this one. It was correcting my team. But because of the way that it sequentially evolved, it looked like I was just ripping into this one relatively junior sailor who was going to be fulfilling the role of lookout. And he didn't know that I had kind of been sassy with some of the JOs who weren't ready for their parts previous to his.
Sure.
And so, we get through and upgrade the folks that are part of the brief. I give permission for folks to take station. And my senior enlisted leader on the watch, the pilot who drives the Virginia-class submarine, it's like, hey, man, request you alongside. And I'm like, oh, they only do that when they're about to give you some feedback, right? And so my senior chief and chief, who are standing pilot and co-pilot, were like, ma'am, the way that list looked to the watch team, who's not privy to everything that was happening to the officers, is that you just destroyed this junior sailor. And so they were like, while it's not necessarily appropriate for you to like readdress all of them, they were like, you can do something that's sort of visible to all of them to make that sailor like know that you set your expectation, but still kind of pump him up. So they like gave a pre-brief to the sailor and were like, hey, do you understand what the expectation is and where you're wrong? They were like, he's like, yes, chief, yes, senior. And then same thing, I call him over to the con, and the whole watch team then sees me say like, hey, shipmate, like, I care about you and I want you to be safe during this evolution, and you understand the standard. Like, I'm not mad at you. I just want you to be good. Are you good? Are we good? And he's like, yes, ma'am, I understand. Like, sorry to disappoint you. I'm like, not disappointed. We're just going to do this thing safely. And like, I'm proud of you for bouncing back and, having a positive attitude as we complete this evolution. So the team saw that, right? And all was right in the world. But that's, I think, the beautiful thing about submarining is that I'm a very, squarely mid-grade, bordering on becoming one of the more senior people in the community. And I, as a lieutenant commander in 2004 with almost 10 years of commissioned service under my belt, had a chief on my watch team who was able to provide me the backup to do the right thing by my sailors. That is submarining. And while I'm sure that forms of that exist across the Navy, it will not be to the same extent that exists in my community. So again, if you're the person who runs towards the danger, who runs towards the hardest opportunities, who wants to be made better every day from a leadership and technical lens, it's the community for you, hands down.
I don't even know that we need to continue the episode. I love it.
Yeah, my episode. Cut it.
No, but I do want to continue because again, I think we've touched very heavily on the fact like this is an incredible community. There is a lot of incredible things that happen. You're going to be surrounded by amazing people, and there's a lot of good associated with a career in submarining. But I also believe in radical transparency to make sure that people always know what they're getting themselves into, and that quite literally that the pros outweigh the cons for their specific life situation, their personality, and how they are, right?
Correct.
And so I do want to shift a little bit to the less glamorous aspects of submarining, because for anyone who doesn't know, this is a moment that's really honestly special in my life. Is while I was underway with Andrea on the Ohio. This was post my tactical seas tour. I was done deploying. At this point, I was an evaluator for some of the direct support officers, which is the billet and the name they give for the cryptologic officer on board the submarine. And we were in missile compartment upper level on the USS Ohio, and we had a really deep, in-depth conversation about some of the difficulties of being on a submarine for that long, and some of the battles of not only the Navy but being away from home for so long. Some of the difficulties of a sporadic, like fast attack submarine life, and the amount of mission periods, things that change, the constant shifts in schedule, and this real idea of being like semper gumby, right? It's something we hear a lot in the military, but just always being flexible to the amount of change that happens. And so on the flip side now is I want to turn it over to you and see, in your opinion, what are some of the less glamorous aspects of being a submariner? What have some of the real difficult aspects been in your life? And what have you witnessed from other people as well that come along with all of the good that is being a submariner?
Yeah, I mean, the number one hardship, hands down, is that there's not enough room to hoop underway. We don't get to play basketball.
Ain't nobody getting buckets on a submarine. This is crazy.
Getting buckets. Correct. Grant, we got to give the listeners some context that you and I are loving basketball. We love the game, but it is really difficult though to have the world move on and for me to not be able to keep up with the WNBA standings, as the season transpires. But it's like that across all facets of your life, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have a super supportive tribe of friends if you want to maintain those relationships. And those people know that when you pop up and are able to be present, that they appreciate that, but have a lot of understanding when it's not the case. Family is family for life, for a lot of us. And if you're blessed to be in that situation where you have those close relationships with family, I'd say that is one of the larger strains is, just seeing folks age or missing life events and births and birthdays and holidays. Those are the sacrifices that sometimes are warranted within this community and seem to hit a little bit harder in this community than others. I see friends who are surface warfare officers on carriers, and now even some of the smaller vessels like the destroyers and cruisers, who are able to FaceTime home. You don't do that on a submarine, right? You're able to be on email. You are able to occasionally, call if there's a big family occasion. We're able to establish comms and get on the satellite phones. But for the most part, you're really out of reach from your family in a consistent fashion. And so that definitely, I think, is the number one cost that you pay. I'll give the advice, if you are a submariner, to choose wisely when it comes to spouses. I'm married an incredible, highly independent woman who loves kind of both chapters of our lives as they exist in the present moment. We always have two chapters while we're in sea duty. It's the time together and time apart. And she's able to thrive in both. We actually like that when we're together, we kind of maximize the time, and it almost feels like a vacation, and then on the other side, she's the type of person who will do her hobbies, whether it's gardening or CrossFit or name your XYZ activity. And she thrives in those different components and silos of our lives. But it is very difficult to merge lives together and then break them apart and then re-merge them. But it does create something that's very transformative and beautiful as you age together. We're in our young 30s, so maybe aging together isn't the exact verb that we're going for, but I feel like we've had a number of really beautiful chapters of our lives together in different places like Washington State, Hawaii, Guam, I was by myself, but back to the East Coast for some time in DC, Groton, Connecticut, Hampton Roads, Virginia. So, I mean, it's the adventure of a lifetime. And if you can bring another person through that with you, then that's an awesome treat. But, I think that's just the reality is having those balances in your relationships. We'll break and talk about mental health because that is such a focus, not just from the deck plate, but the Navy leadership as it translates down to the deck plate. You have to find the things as a submariner that give you balance. And it probably is some of the notionally toughest work-life balance in the military, because again, you are living where you work with no ability at times to have an outlet to the outer world. You have to have red lines though. So like, for myself, when I'm in port, I will make sure that I carve out time to work out. When I'm underway, I will also find time to work out. My wife and I have merged our workout time ashore as long as we're together to make that be a joint activity where we're building our relationship and building our physical and mental health. Underway, some people watch TV, some people play video games, some people, write or color or whatever the case may be. There are ways that you have to maintain your identity and not let it get all consuming. So, if I were to summarize all of those stressors, I think the biggest danger of being a submariner from a personal perspective is that you let it become all consuming. You need to always strive to be a submariner and a spouse, a submariner and a daughter, a submariner and a good friend, a submariner and a guitarist or a basketball player, whatever it is that makes you tick. And I've very much so said that the people who thrive best in this community, it's sort of ironic, are those that are able to maintain those identities and maintain their authenticity and that genuine part of their personality, because it makes people want to be like you someday. If all you have is work, then work isn't going to work for you, right? You have to have that holistic personhood that's brought into submarining. And so, define those red lines and communicate to your chain of command so that they can help back you up on that too and give you the time and space to be that whole person.
Yeah. I struggled with that a lot. Right. And that was part of the conversation that we had together on board that submarine. And I think that's really difficult because for me, with the sporadic nature of being a cryptologic direct support element and hopping from boat to boat and, not having a set schedule and being all these things, I never established any rhythms. I never established any routines. I kind of got rid of everything that brought me joy and made me who I was. Right. And it was extremely difficult. And the easiest way to do that was kind of just to become numb, right? Numb to it. Just be like, yep, all right. I'm not going to like try and get too high and excited while I'm home because I know I'm about to flip and go back onto the boat. Right. So I just kind of stayed in this neutral state. Right. And so again, as we have these conversations, those are the challenges that you can fall into, right? Like those are the challenges that you will face. And like Andrea is saying, there are ways to solve it and not even solve it, but make the most of it, right? And face it head on and do the things that you need to do to maintain that status of being healthy mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, right? And so those things do exist, but it is difficult. And, it's really funny that you mentioned the connectivity aspect, right? Like that piece was weird. I was on deployment in 2020, basically the entirety of, well, I guess, right? Yeah, 2020. COVID-19. So COVID year was 20, right? And, we're on board this submarine and all you're reading, because again, we're on mission, right? It's not like we're coming up. We're not. So for anyone who's listening, like submarines, your ability to receive and send off communication is very dependent on currently what you are actively doing in your mission. Right. And so we're in a place where we're not coming up to the surface of the submarine and sticking out a big antenna to get a satellite download. You're like floating a little wire, right? And copying very minimal amounts of broadcasts. And so, we're receiving updates about COVID. Wow. And we don't know anything that's going on. I got underway on March 13th. Never heard of her. I don't know what this thing is. March 13th, 2020, we get underway. And so end of March, early April, we're seeing headlines, right? Like 70,000th person dies in Italy from COVID, right? Like COVID cases exceed 1 million like worldwide. Like you start getting to these things and you start worrying, right? You start worrying about your family. You start worrying about all these things that are going on. And that continued into the year because that was an election year, right? Like, we
Yep.
found out who the president of the United States was like 3 days late, right? And it's just a headline, right? And you have
Yep.
no additional information. You're just like, you just get the thing, right? Like, Biden wins election. Like, that's it, right? And so it's just like, it's a really, I don't want to use the word weird, but like you kind of mentioned, it's its own unique, neat
It's weird.
world, right?
It's
It's
weird.
weird.
Yeah.
You're in your own little fairyland down there, right? Like, it's almost like it's its own world. And so, it's like one of those things that you just have to get used to, and you have to
Mhm.
adjust, and you have to train that muscle of, again, like you're saying, when you're on the submarine, being the submariner, but still being able to separate yourself and not be stuck and focused and have that be completely, totally encompassing when your life is outside of it. Right. And
Correct.
so, yeah, it's one of those like really weird things when I reflect back on my time on a submarine. I'm like, I missed COVID, right? Like, I was just like on a submarine, like getting updates, right? I missed the election. Like, there are a lot of things that you just miss, the birth of my niece, right? Like, miss birthdays, holidays, like you're saying. Like, those are things that, again, for me, added up, right? And I was like, I knew I wanted to kind of prioritize something else, but like
Yeah.
you mentioned, sometimes those are the sacrifices that you just need to be aware of.
Mhm.
And so with that conversation about, again, some of the costs of being a submariner as well, and the impacts it makes on your life, I do just want to turn it over to you for one last question, which is, what's your best recruiting pitch for why someone should consider, one, a service academy, but then two, selecting the submarine community as, what they do in the military?
I'll give you two quick stories that come from both inspiring the next generation and connecting with those who've come before you. So there I was at the Foxwoods Casino in Groton, Connecticut, with my wife for one of the submarine birthday balls. This would have been in 2022 when I was a student at the Submarine Officer Advanced course, which is your ticket to become a department head. And we were just dancing on the dance floor, and I had this awesome 17-year-old gal come up to us, who said, I didn't think that there was anybody in this community who was like me and who I want to be like. Simple moment, right? Just us being ourselves on the dance floor goofing around, and it was an inspirational and pretty pivotal moment for a junior sailor. It's an all volunteer force for submarining, and we need people to feel motivated and inspired to join the community. And so, anybody has the ability to be that leader who makes a young person, raise their right hand, support and defend the Constitution, and join in what is the most vital area for potential future conflict. We didn't touch on that, but
Mhm.
submarines are going to be the first line of offense or defense in any major conflict. That's what we're constantly practicing for. So again, you want to have the knife in your teeth and inspire this next generation of people who's going to potentially save the nation. I'm not being exaggeratory. Potentially save the nation and defend freedom of the seas abroad. That's submarines. But again, folks who've been privy to this conversation might say, that's all well and fine. I can do that in another warfare domain. What are you really getting out of being part of this community? It is so hard to convey the meaning behind wearing those dolphins, that submarine warfare insignia. But my wife and I went to a Hampton Roads Naval Submarine League event. And again, my wife is a great balance to this crazy lifestyle and is always challenging me and making sure that if I continue to commit to this community, that it's really what I want to do. But we went to this event and we met some awesome served, admirals and Navy captains who had been part of this community. And by the time we left, having interacted with them and their spouses, my wife was like, hey, Andrea, you really got to stay and try for command, because there is just such a buzz of pride
Yep.
amongst this community and those of us and those who support us, who really know what it means to be at the forefront of this national security imperative. And I'll tell you that it is the hardest thing that I will ever do in my life, submarining. And this is from the lens of somebody who went to school internationally, and I'm applying to potentially get a PhD. There will be nothing harder than being a submariner with submarine warfare qualifications.
Mhm.
And there is truly nothing, probably short of being hopefully a future parent and trying to be an awesome wife, third in line to that. I would say that the proudest thing that I will have as part of my identity is having served under the sea with some of the smartest and most motivated sailors in the entire world.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the recruiting pitch. And I think this episode at large was a massive, just again, insight and positive thing. Again, I share my stories of some of the difficulties Going
Yeah.
on all the submarine deployments to this day was probably the coolest thing I've ever done, and gave me a ton of purpose, right? Gave me a ton of mission, and it's incredible. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, sharing your insight and wisdom, and again, hopefully inspiring the next wave of midshipmen or even potential, prospective high school students to consider the submarine force and all the incredible things that are going on there. So we appreciate you so much.
We appreciate you. Go Academy Insider. Beat Army.
I love it. Beat Army. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and let me know if you ever have any questions. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Academy Insider Podcast. I really hope you liked it, enjoyed it, and learned something during this time. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe or leave a comment about the episode. We really appreciate to hear your feedback about everything and continue to make Academy Insider an amazing service that guides, serves, and supports midshipmen, future midshipmen, and their families. Thank you.